Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this Troy-Bilt Pony Tiller. It is powered by a 5-horse Briggs and Stratton engine, and according to the date code, this was made in May 22nd of 1996. So this machine is about 30 years old, and given its age of 30 years, it's actually in very good condition. That said though, the engine, although it rotates and has compression, it will not start. I tried earlier today. The tank was actually dry and clean, so I added some fresh fuel, pulled it over about 30 times, and got absolutely no signs of life. So the goal today is going to be to get this up and running again. It is the first week in May. It is tilling season, and a tiller with no engine is no good. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. So before digging in on this, let's just try to start it again. So I've got the throttle about in the halfway position. This fuel cap is leaking, so we're gonna have to fix that when we get to it. The choke was already on. Hey! Fixed, almost. That's more than it did before. The starter recoil too isn't the best. It's just kind of flexing as I pull it, kind of out of my hand. Let's try this again. Choke off. Okay, and at least we got something. So we know we have compression, we have spark, we have timing. We don't have fuel, or at least not enough to run it for more than a second. So let's get the carb off, we'll get it cleaned up, and this thing should come right back to life. And I probably should have shown you this in advance, but the oil is good. It is full almost up to the last thread, and the oil is actually nice and clean. So I think this oil was changed, I would say, after it was last run. Anyway, to get the carb off, we're going to have to start by pulling the airbox, the choke control, and then the carburetor. It's actually attached to the tank, so we do need to remove the bolts holding the carb on to the engine, as well as the one bolt underneath, and the tank and the carb will come off as one assembly. This might be the cleanest airbox I've ever worked on. This design isn't great because if any water gets in here, the airbox is going to rust up. And that bolt was loose. So is that one. So no surprise, but someone's been in here at some point. And these carbs, they are very simple. There's not a lot to go wrong. There's actually a fuel pump right here. And behind this cover is a diaphragm. These commonly go bad. So if you want to do a quick fix, chances are replacing that diaphragm will restore some function to the carburetor. But, I'd rather clean it and just know 100%. The idle set screw too is driven pretty far in, so yeah, I think someone was fighting this at one point. That was also loose. I hope all the bolts are like that. So I'm going to get most of the fuel out of the tank. Even though I know it's good, there's a good chance we're going to have to clean the bowl for the carburetor, which is actually integrated into the tank. And with fuel in there, likely debris and contamination will get in there as well. So we'll just get the tank fully emptied before we pull the carb off. And I almost forgot, we can't pull the tank off until we remove the throttle and the kill wire. So we'll just loosen the throttle cable up. And disconnect it. And the kill wire, it's bent over here, so we actually need to straighten that first. Like that. And if we push down on this piece of metal and hold, that wire comes right out of there. So now it's just this bolt and the two on the carburetor. There's not a lot of room here on this bottom one, but it is coming out. So once we get it fully out, there is going to be some linkage to disconnect. Yeah, so it's hard to see, but there is a spring down here. So get that off, the governor arm, as well as the governor rod. And there we go. So there's a total of 4 screws holding this carb on. We've already got one of them off. So we get the other 3 off. And then we need to break the seal. There's a big gasket between the carb and the tank. Boy, all these bolts are pretty loose. I can't believe it just came off that easy. That might be a first. And from what I can see, things actually look pretty good. The pickup tube is in great shape. This anode looks brand new. And really, the internals of the carb look to be in great shape. If you look in the tank, you can see the bowl. There's a little bit of, I would say, old fuel or just garbage. But in general, this is in really good shape. So I'm guessing the issue is here with the pump. So let's get that opened up and have a look. Go. And there was some fuel there. Cover is in very good shape. And the diaphragm isn't terrible, but this part here, this is very stretched out. You know, it's not torn. And I think the bigger issue is the check valves. You can see they're not sitting very flat. You know, so likely that is the reason why it wasn't pumping. So yeah, this one I think is going to be pretty easy to bring back to life. Just got a spring and a cap. And on the other side, we have an adjustable needle. So let's see where that is set. Just a little bit over half a turn out. Yeah, a little bit of varnish there on the tip. And that is pretty much it. The main jet's there. It is not removable. And it looks to be clear, but we'll double check that. And the idle set screw driven most of the way in, so I am going to back that out as well. You know, there's no need to remove it completely, but I don't think we're going to need it driven in quite as far as it was. So I'm going to run through the passages, make sure they're clear. We'll give this a soak in the ultrasonic, and then we'll put it back together with a new pump diaphragm, and I think we'll be back in business. All right, let's get this carb back together, starting with the pump diaphragm. The one that we pulled out was in pretty bad shape. You know, I think that was the issue here. And I do have a new replacement. That said, though, it is a little bit different. Right up here in the corner, we're missing kind of that cutout for the bolt. You know, instead, this aftermarket one kind of bypasses that. But I don't think we're going to have an issue with it. It should still clamp and make a seal. So we'll get the spring back in along with that cap, which really just protects the diaphragm. You don't want the spring directly on it, or it will likely cause damage. So that looks good. And we'll get the needle back in and back it out about 1/2 turn, and then about 1/8 further. So there's 1/2 and 1/8. And believe it or not, that is it. There's really nothing to this carb, so I'm going to spend a second. We got to get that tank cleaned up, at least on the exterior. Then we can bolt this back on and reattach it to the engine. And the inside of the tank is clean, so I added this tape just to keep the dirt from falling in. And the cap, it does feel like it's making a good seal. So I'm not sure that the problem's actually the cap. I'm willing to bet, it's some of this rust going around the lip here that might potentially be causing the problem. So I'm going to use a bit of Scotch-Brite and just clean that up. And once we get it started, we'll know pretty quickly if this is making a seal. I think that's about as good as it's going to get. I'm actually concerned that the surface might not be flat, which I hope isn't the case. But the cap's definitely making a good seal. Or at least it's on tight. Anyway, let's get the gasket back on. We'll drop the carb in, bolt it down, and we'll try it out. All right, so let's get the tank back on. We need to start with the governor rod. And once that's on, we can connect the governor spring down below. Like that. And then we have the breather tube. So we'll get that in. And then we can secure it with the 2 carb bolts and the 1 tank bolt. So we'll get that kill wire back in place. And originally it was bent over, which there is no need to do that. So I'm just going to leave it like that. We'll get the throttle cable back in. I think it was in the top hole. And I'm going to move the throttle into the stop position. And then we'll just hold this in the stop position while we tighten the clamp down. Okay, so we're just about done down here. The tank bolt is still loose, so we'll snug that up. And I think we'll be ready to add some fuel, and we'll try to start it. So before we start it, let's just check the gearbox, make sure it has some oil in it. Yeah, I'm not sure it shows up too well on camera, but we do have oil. It's actually filled up right about to the check plug, which is right there. And, you know, that is something we'll probably change. But let's hear the machine run first before changing that oil. All right, let's turn the ignition on, give it a little bit of throttle. The idle, we might have to adjust. The jetting, we might have to adjust. So, place your bets. How many pulls? I'm going to go with 7 because the bowl is empty. And it's going to take a good few pulls to fill that up, I think. That was 6. 7. Let's try it with the choke open. And choke closed. Nothing. But on the good news side, I don't see much fuel leaking out. So I'm going to give it a few more pulls, and you know, we might need to adjust the needle. It's just over half a turn out, which seems like it may not be enough. So I'm going to turn it just a little more. All right, let's try that. Nothing. So let's give it a little help. Okay. I'm going to open up that needle a little bit more. Quarter turn. Let's go another quarter. It's not looking good. Just opened it another quarter. Check open. Huh. Yeah, it's not getting fuel still. So let's try to keep it running a little longer. Well, I was way off. I was thinking about 7 pulls to get that pump primed and the bowl filled up, but I actually lost track of how many times I pulled this engine over. I would say it was a good 30 times. Thankfully, though, the engine did start, and with a little bit of tuning on that needle, I think we're kind of in the sweet spot. So all the functions seem to work, And now that the pump is primed and the bowl is full, I do want to test starting it one more time before moving on. All right, let's turn the ignition on. Give it a little bit of throttle. And let's try it with the choke off. Okay. Let's give it a little more throttle. Maybe some choke. It's trying, but not very hard. Let's try it with the choke open again. Yeah, it's not happy about something, so the only thing I can think of is potentially a new plug might help here. So we have a J19LM. Plug has seen a bit of action. So we'll replace that with a brand new RJ19LM. Okay, let's try that. All right, we'll try it again with the choke off. And choke on. Very interesting. So why, once running, does it run? But when it's off, it doesn't like to run. So I'm going to give it maybe a quarter turn, which I think is too much, but that is going to let more fuel in. Choke off. Give it a little squirt. I'm thinking we should add the air filter. So I'm going to set this back to one turn out. And we'll get the air filter and the air box back. And maybe that'll make a difference. Okay, ignition, it's back on. Try it with the choke off. Let's try it again, choke off. And we'll do it one more time. That was it, just the airbox. So adding the airbox seemed to fix the issue. We started it 3 times in a row without issue. So I went to bed all happy that this was fixed. And when I woke up this morning, I got to thinking, it doesn't really make sense that adding the airbox fixed the issue. That would fix a run issue, but not a starting issue. So I tried to start it this morning with a cold engine, and even with the airbox on, it would not restart. So I think I know what's going on here. I was actually editing last night's footage together, and I kind of spotted the problem. So at least I think I did. Anyway, let me just show you that it's not starting again, and then I'm going to pull this airbox cover and the filter back out and show you what the problem actually is. So the ignition is now turned on, throttle about midway, and the choke is already on. It's pushed all the way. And that's it. I'm not going to pull it anymore. I mean, this engine should start almost immediately. I know the bowl is full. I know the carb runs it well when it starts, but it's not starting. So let's get the cover off and I'll show you what I found. To start a cold engine, you need more fuel. And the way you get that is by closing the choke. That restricts the airflow and forces more fuel into the engine to get it started. And, although the choke seems to work, it's not actually closing, at least not all the way. You can tell by the way that this lever is moving over. There's actually more throw to it. And if you look real close, you can see a gap on either side of that choke plate. So let me get in there a little closer. And on first glance, the choke seems to be working fine. But if you look real close, you can see there's actually a gap right there between the plate and the side of the carburetor. And it's even worse on the other side. So the choke, it's closed, but it's not closed all the way. It's about 95% closed, and that actually makes a pretty big difference. So the plate on this machine, it's not held in place by screws. It's actually pushed in, and it's the barbs that kind of keep that in place. So if we just recenter it, kind of like that, and now we close it, it closes all the way and forms a tight seal. The only air getting in now is the air through that little hole. And I think that likely was the problem all along. So let's try restarting it without the airbox cover or filter and see how many pulls it takes now. All right, let's try this again. Throttle's in the same position as it was. The only difference is the choke is actually fully closed. Okay, crack it open now. That's all it was. And that's all it was, just a choke plate that was a little bit out of center. So it definitely makes me wonder if the carb even needed a clean. Either way, we now know the carb is spotless and we shouldn't have any run issues with this. So the engine, the carb, I would say are all set. So before moving on, I think we'll throw the airbox back on and get the oil changed. Although it looked good, I don't know how long it's been in there or if it's even the right grade oil for this machine. Well, the engine, it is more or less done, but I'm going to double check the head bolts. These do like to stretch around the exhaust port especially. And as a result, they loosen up. But this one's actually turning, which is a little surprising because I can't imagine this engine has too many hours on it. That one was tight. That one's good. That one's turning. That one turned. That one was pretty loose. So is that one. Just one more left. Okay, so the engine, I would say, is done. For the most part, the oil seals on this tiller seem to be holding. At least the two over on this side. Over here, the back seal on the tines looks pretty dry, but the one here in the drive wheel is wet. And actually, if you look a little further down on the table, it is starting to form a bit of a puddle. So this oil seal should be replaced. I guess the question is, will the wheel come off? So let's just test that. And if the wheel is going to play nice, then we will get a new seal ordered up. Not a good sign. Nope. It is frozen to the shaft, so I was kind of worried about that. You know, there's a few things we could try here. Question is, which one is going to work with the least amount of damage? So heat or oxyacetylene would certainly do it. It would ruin the paint. And I don't have oxyacetylene. I just have MAP gas, which is basically propane. And, you know, of course, we risk damaging the actual tire as well. So, you know, I might try an air hammer, but there's really no way to keep it still. So I might drill into this a bit to kind of act as a locating pin. Or we could actually try a puller. But again, with this wheel here, I don't really see how I can get a puller on there. Yeah, let me give this one a little thought. I'm going to end up on the floor. Nope. Nope, that didn't do anything. I think we'll try a little bit of heat. And to do that, I'm going to get the valve stem out so we don't build any pressure in the tire. And I'm also going to have some water handy so we can cool down the rim where it meets the tire if we should need to. Looks like we can try the 2-jaw puller. Not that I think it's going to do anything, but you never know. If it's just a little stuck, then this will do it. And for the record, I don't think it's a little stuck. So likely the only thing that's going to happen here is that I break the puller. And yeah, that's a lot of pressure. Don't think that's going to do it. So yeah, not having a whole lot of luck getting this wheel off using heat, using the air hammer, using that little puller. So I'm thinking about upping the game a little bit. We'll try the harmonic balancer puller. The only problem is we don't have any holes to pull. And some wheels do have that. So I'm thinking, we can add the holes and then we'll just put some bolts through with some nuts on the back side. And then we'll have more leverage to at least apply a decent amount of force here. And if it doesn't break free at that point, we can add some heat, and maybe between the two, we can get this wheel to break loose. It's starting to move. was about to give up on this one. You can see how much force I had to apply. That was the point on the puller that created this huge hole. You know, that was not drilled out. Anyway, we are off, so we do have access to the seal. So I'm not going to pull the seal yet, you know, until I get the new seal here in hand, just to make sure it's the right size. So for now, I'm just going to clean this up and verify that we can slide the wheel on and off without the use of a puller. Yeah, it's amazing how well it fits. Just a minute or two cleaning that rust off, and this thing fits in there like it's supposed to. So I'm going to order the seal, actually for both sides. For now, though, I'm just going to put the pin back on, and we'll come back to this once we get the new seal. So I did add just a bit of grease to the axle. You know, with my luck, it'll flash rust back to the axle while we're waiting for the new seal to show up. So I'm thinking before we take this off to try to straighten the flap, I do want to get it moving again. So give it a little bit, or I should say a lot of bit, of penetrating oil in here. And then just work it back and forth until it starts to move. And some of this actually could be due to a bend right there, but you know, as I say that, it's actually starting to move pretty good. Yeah, that should be good enough. So let's pull this whole thing off. Just 2 bolts here, 2 on the other end. And we'll get this on the floor and just try to reshape this a little bit closer to how it used to be. So oddly enough, I can't get this off because the knob is just a little bit too big. So I'm not really sure what they were thinking here when they did this. You know, I've already tried twisting it. It turns, but it doesn't actually unscrew. So, you know, I think this is likely a press fit. likely hammered on, which is fine, but for removal, makes it a little bit more challenging. So I think the best way to go about this is probably to wiggle it back and forth while applying some pressure, trying to pull it out. And I think it is coming out. Yeah, there we go. So there's the knob, and then this piece right here, which is used to kind of clamp it all in place. So yeah, looks like it came out intact. So with that removed, this should come right off. So yeah, this is gonna make a bit of noise trying to straighten this out. I think I'm gonna start with the hinge area first. Just get that reasonably flat, especially in this area. All right, that's pretty good there. Looks like we have a little divot right there, so that could use a few hits. All right, that seems pretty good. A little bit right there. And we can come back to that. It's not perfect. And then as far as this part goes, I'm thinking we might be better off laying it down like that. And try to straighten that out. So it's a few days later, and I have what hopefully is the right oil seal for this. I did not buy OEM, mostly because I wanted to get the part as soon as possible. But when you order aftermarket parts, you never know for sure if it's going to be the right part. All right, let me clean this up, and we'll just try to loosely fit it on. Definitely a snug fit, which is good. You know, you don't want it to be loose or oil's gonna come out. So I'd say the inner diameter is correct, and the outer looks correct. So let's get the old seal out. And actually, before we do that, let's drain the gearbox oil. Yeah, this is going to take a while. And it's also coming out kind of a milk chocolate color, so there is a little bit of water mixed in. So I just took the cap off. We're coming out a lot faster. So yeah, I guess while that is draining, let's see if we can get that old seal out. There we go. They look to be a match. So the tricky part is going to be getting this past the jack without causing any damage. So I'm going to oil this up pretty good, maybe with some assembly lube or some grease. In here, I've already cleaned it out, but I do want to clean this shaft one more time because any debris that's on here, you know, the seal is going to act as a wiper, just pushing it all in. So you do want to have this pretty clean, not only to keep junk out of there, but to also keep from tearing up the new seal. So I ended up blocking it under the engine. So theoretically, we can pull away this jack and things are reasonably supported. So we've got most of the gearbox oil out. I'm going to let that kind of drizzle the last bit out. And although I did get most of this grease off, there is still a bit. So we'll get that cleaned up completely so that way if it starts leaking again, it'll be pretty apparent. So I've got the drain back in and we've got the full level plug out. So we're just going to add some oil until we see it coming out of that full plug. And all I can say is if you have a snowblower, a tiller, a tractor, really anything with a wheel that goes onto a shaft like this, you have to pull that off and grease it or use anti-seize. It's going to save yourself a lot of trouble in the future if you ever need to take that wheel off. So, the oil seal on the other side, it's not leaking. I'm tempted to replace it anyway, but given that it's completely dry, I think, I'm just going to pull the wheel. We'll put some anti-seize on that axle. And then if it ever does start to leak, it won't be a big deal to get that seal swapped out. So we're now on the other side of the machine, and of course this one isn't stuck, and it's not leaking either, but it is going to leak someday. So let's clean that up, get some anti-seize on that, and that way it'll be a 2-minute job to swap that out in the future rather than a 2-hour job like it was on the other side. I was about to say we're done, and then I reminded myself that this is less than ideal. I mean, can you start the engine like this? You can, but yeah, I've got something that'll fit that better. And I think what originally was in the center here was an insert, very similar to this one, and the rope should have tied to that. And then when you lock the two together, it forms a strong candle. But instead, that insert was lost for whatever reason, and the rope was just tied to kind of what remained. Anyway, let's cut this out, and we'll get the complete one installed in its place. And just one more thing worthy of note here. This machine, when traveling forward, the wheels rotate counterclockwise. And when I was looking at the tread pattern, it looked like the wheels were on backwards. And sure enough, there is an arrow right here indicating that this tread should rotate in this direction. So this wheel that was rust jacked in place was actually on the wrong side. Likely these wheels have been on the wrong side for quite a long time. Anyway, I'm not going to bore you with this, but I'm going to swap the wheels around before putting this to work. All right, let's give this thing a try. Now, I don't have a garden to try it in, but I do have this strip of lawn, which doesn't grow a lot of grass. So I'm just going to run this through a few passes, make sure the engine and the gearbox are up to the task. Okay, good. So really no issues to report on this machine. It started just after a few pulls. The engine ran quite well. And both the engine and the gearbox were up to the task. It had no issues at all tilling this small patch of land. So, at this point, the machine is more or less ready to go, but there is still one problem here, and that is the seal between the cap and the tank. It did let a little bit of fuel out while tilling, which probably isn't good for anything you're trying to plant here. So, I am going to get a new cap ordered up. Likely that'll solve the problem. But for now, I think I'm done. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching. All right, a little bonus footage here, but it occurs to me I have another project here waiting to get fixed, and that, I think, has the cap we need. Now, this one doesn't look better, and it actually does feel a little better. So I'm actually going to fit this to the machine outside, and we'll till again just for a short time and see if this fixes our problem. Yeah, I'd say the cap that came off of there looks better than this one, so I'm not giving this one much hope. Although like that one, it seems to make a tight seal. So yeah, let's make a couple passes and see if this area stays dry. So this cap, even though it looked worse, it seems to be making a good seal. You know, I did fill the tank up, and I'm kind of putting it to an extreme test right now. And it seems to be holding up, because that other cap, the fuel was literally just streaming down the side. And this one actually seems to be working properly. So although it doesn't look great, it is doing the job for now. I've already ordered up a new one, which will be here tomorrow. I think it was about $12 off of Amazon, a good Stens part. So yeah, now I'm done.